The alkali dust was a shroud, a pale ghost that clung to Ilara's torn shift. It kicked her bare legs, filled the cracks in her lips, and coated her tongue with the taste of failure. She had been running for 6 days. 6 days of brush tearing at her skin, of sun hammering down by day, and a bone-deep cold seeping in by night. Now, the running was done. She sat, huddled, a small, broken thing in the vast, empty expanse of the high desert. The sky was on fire, a spectacular, dying blaze of orange and violet that offered no warmth, only a final, mocking beauty. The light caught the tears that tracked clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She shivered, though the air was still. It was a tremor, born of pure, distilled terror. Behind her, he stood, a perfect silhouette against the bleeding sun. He hadn't spoken a word in the last hour, not since he'd emerged from the shimmering heat haze like a phantom. He'd just, appeared. One moment, she was alone, forcing her raw feet one in front of the other. The next, he was there, rifle in hand, blocking her path to the dying light. His name, she'd heard whispered back in Oakhaven, was Silas Vane. They called him the Shadow. Not because he was quiet, though he was, but because by the time you saw him, your sun had already set. He was the end of the line. Ilara hugged her knees to her chest, her arms wrapped tight around her shins. The pose was defensive, an instinctive attempt to make herself smaller, to shield the last flickering ember of her life from the wind. She could feel his presence like a physical weight, a cold spot in the twilight. He wasn't looking at her. His head was turned slightly, scanning the horizon as if he owned it, as if she were merely an afterthought, an animal caught in a trap, to be dealt with when he was ready. "Please," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp that the wind snatched away. I didn't do it. You have to believe me." Silas Vane remained motionless, the long barrel of his rifle resting in the crook of his arm, parallel to the flat, endless earth. He wore the uniform of his trader-duster, a wide-brimmed hat, and a stillness that seemed carved from the same rock as the distant mesas. "Get up," he said. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with absolute authority. It was flat, devoid of malice or pity. It was the voice of a man completing a transaction. Ilara squeezed her eyes shut. She had seen the bounty poster herself, tacked to the sheriff's office, 200 miles from here. Wanted Ilara Garrison, for the murder of her husband, Jonathan Garrison, $1,000, dead or alive. Jonathan, who had broken her arm 3 weeks into their marriage. Jonathan, who collected powerful friends like he collected exotic pistols. Jonathan, who she'd last seen lying in a pool of his own blood, a letter opener in his chest, ... An act she had confessed to, screaming to the uncaring stars, but an act she could not, for the life of her, remember committing. She had just woken up, his blood on her hands. "I can't," she wept, rocking slowly in the dust. "I can't walk anymore. Just ... just do it here." The shadow finally moved. He took one step toward her. The crunch of his boot on the gravel was the loudest sound in the world. He stopped, still 10 paces away. The sun dipped lower, and his shadow stretched, a long, dark finger of judgment that touched the hem of her torn dress. "I'm paid to bring you to Judge Thorne. Alive is preferred. It pays the same." He shifted the rifle, not to aim it, but to rest it on his shoulder. "But if you die of thirst out here, I still get paid. Get up, we walk, we walk." The last sliver of sun vanished, and the desert's false warmth fled with it. The temperature plummeted with predatory speed. The grand, painted sky bruised to a deep indigo, then blackened, and a billion stars snapped into view. Cold and impossibly distant. Ilara stumbled, her bare foot striking a sharp piece of shale. A choked cry of pain escaped her, but she didn't fall. She couldn't. Silas Vane had produced a coil of thin, strong rope from his saddlebag. One end was tied around her left wrist. The other was tied to his own. The length between them was just long enough to be cruel, forcing her to match his long, steady pace or be dragged. He walked with an unnerving, economical gait, his horse a lean, mean-looking Appaloosa trailing behind him. He hadn't bothered to bind her hands completely. He hadn't needed to. Out here, with him, the single rope was a chain. Where are we going? She asked, her teeth beginning to chatter. The thin cotton shift was useless against the night air. Town, eventually. I won't make it to any town. You will. Judge Thorne's a stickler for paperwork. He prefers his bounties breathing. They walked in silence for what felt like hours. The only sounds were their footsteps as measured bootfalls, her painful shuffling scrapes and the horse's tired snorts. The memory of her husband's study kept flashing in her mind, a nightmarish slideshow. The smell of brandy and cigar smoke, the slick, dark stain spreading across the Persian rug, the weight of the letter opener in her hand, so small for such a final, terrible act. She hadn't wanted to kill him. She had only wanted to leave. She had packed a small bag, hidden under a loose floorboard in her room, saving up the sparse housekeeping money he allowed her. She was going to go to California, change her name, become a seamstress, anything. She had dreamed of an ocean she had never seen, a place where the land simply stopped, and a man couldn't follow you anymore. But he had found her bag. He had been waiting for her in his study, her small, pathetic collection of belongings dumped on his desk. He had been drunk, his eyes gleaming with that familiar, terrifying mix of rage and pleasure. Running away, little mouse, he'd sneered, blocking the door. You think you can just leave me? He had grabbed her. She remembered screaming. She remembered the glint of the silver letter opener on his desk, the one his father had given him. And then nothing. A black, jagged hole in her memory. The next thing she knew, she was on her knees, the handle of the opener slick in her palm, and he was staring at the ceiling, his eyes wide and unseeing. She had run out the back door, into the stables, and just kept running, not even stopping for a horse, driven by a primal panic that had only just now guttered out in the face of this new, slower, colder end. Stop, Silas said. Alara nearly fell, the rope going taut. He had paused in the meager shelter of a low, rocky overhang. He unslung his saddlebag and dropped it to the ground. He untied her wrist without a word, then set about building a small, smokeless fire from dry brush he'd gathered. He was efficient. Within minutes, a small fire crackled, casting their long, dancing shadows against the rock. He took out a canteen and a small, hard biscuit. He tossed the biscuit at her. It landed in the dirt by her feet. She stared at it, her stomach aching, but she couldn't bring herself to pick it up. He sat on the other side of the fire, his hat tipped low, his rifle across his lap. He drank from the canteen, then offered it. She crawled forward and took it, her hands shaking so badly she spilled the first mouthful. The water was metallic and warm, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted. He deserved it, she whispered, her voice stronger now. He was a monster. Silas looked up, his face an unreadable map of shadows in the firelight. Everyone's a monster to someone, girl, and everyone's a saint to someone else. It's not my job to know which. It's my job to get paid. It's my job to get paid. Sleep, Silas ordered, taking the canteen back. We leave before dawn. He settled against his saddle, pulling his duster tighter. He didn't seem to sleep. He just watched. He watched the fire, the darkness, and she felt her. Ilara huddled on the other side of the flames, the biscuit still untouched. Sleep was impossible. Her body was a symphony of aches, and her mind was a hornet's nest. She looked away from him, scanning the small patch of ground illuminated by the fire. Her eyes fell on something wedged between two rocks. It wasn't a stone. It was small, rectangular, and black, with a faint metallic sheen. Curious, she reached for it. It was a small, flat device, slick and cold to the touch. It was an old model, solar-powered, the kind of hopeful, failed technology that littered this broken world, remnants of a time before the collapse, before towns like Oakhaven walled themselves in, and men like Silas Vane became the only law. This one was cracked, but when she turned it over, a tiny green light blinked. It still had a charge. She pressed the only button on its side. A tinny, cheerful voice suddenly filled the silence, making Silas flinch, his hand snapping to the pistol at his hip. ... And that's day 47, the voice said. It was a young man, breathless and full of an optimism that sounded alien out here. Made it past the salt flats. The air is clearer, and I swear the stars are brighter. It's hard, folks, I won't lie, but it's worth it. Every step is a step towards the coast, towards a new beginning. Ilara stared at the device, mesmerized. I'm keeping this video log, just hoping someone finds it one day, the voice continued, full of earnest passion. Hoping this story gets out. The world is still beautiful, you just have to look harder. I've been uploading it whenever I find a working tower, but I bet the signal's weak. Hey, if you're out there, if you find this, check out my channel. It's Wasteland Wanderer. I know, cheesy, right? But it's what I am. Please, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Let someone know I was here. Let them know I tried. There was a click, and the recording ended. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Ilara looked at Silas. His face was rigid, his eyes fixed on the small, black rectangle in her hand. He didn't make it, Silas said, his voice quiet. Ilara's blood ran colder than the desert air. What? Found his pack about 10 miles east of here. 3, maybe 4 months ago. Coyotes got him. Or worse. He nodded at the player. I saw that, but I left it. Figured it wasn't my business. Wasn't worth any coin. Ilara clutched the device, a stranger's last hope, lying in the dirt. A man who had walked this same path, full of dreams, only to become food for coyotes. He just wanted someone to know he was here, she murmured. She suddenly felt an overwhelming kinship with the cheerful, dead voice. Both of them had been looking for a new beginning. Both of them had found Silas Vane's desert instead. We're all just trying to be remembered, she said, her voice hollow. Even you. Silas looked away from her, back into the fire. Some of us are just trying to be forgotten. He tossed a small rolled-up blanket at her. It was thin, but it was something. Get some sleep. The dead are dead. You're not. Ilara wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. She didn't know if it was a kindness or if he just wanted to ensure his bounty survived the night. In the end, it didn't matter. She held the small data player, its surface now warm from her hand, and stared into the embers. The Wasteland Wanderer's final, cheerful words echoing in her head. The faintest hint of gray had begun to lighten the eastern horizon when Silas kicked dirt onto the fire. Up, he said. Ilara's body screamed in protest. Every muscle felt like it had been filled with ground glass. But she rose, clutching the blanket. She had tucked the data player into the waistband of her torn shift. A small, hard secret against her skin. Silas tied the rope back to her wrist, his movements quick and impersonal. He checked his horse, saddled and ready, and then they were moving again, walking into the twilight. They had been walking for an hour when the Appaloosa suddenly stopped, its ears flattening against its skull. What? Ilara whispered. Silas didn't answer. He had already dropped into a low crouch, his rifle up, scanning the ridge of rocks to their left. He pulled the rope, dragging Ilara down behind a pathetic patch of greasewood. Stay down. Don't make a sound, he hissed, and then the world exploded. The flat crack of a rifle shot echoed across the desert, and a chip of rock spun away from Silas's head, stinging his cheek. Damn it, Silas swore, shoving Ilara hard against the ground. It's Hawker's gang. They must have seen my fire. Another shot, then another. Puffs of dust kicked up around them. They were pinned. They want the horse, Silas grunted, firing a single, careful shot back toward the ridge. A cry of pain answered him. And the bounty? Me, Alara whimpered. They'll take you, collect the dead part of dead or alive, and leave me for the vultures. Not on my payroll. More figures were appearing on the ridge now, 5, maybe 6 of them, fanning out, trying to flank them. They were trapped. Silas rummaged in his saddlebag, his face grim. He pulled out his spare revolver. He looked at it, then at Alara. His eyes were cold, calculating. You know how to use one of these? Alara nodded, her mind flashing back to her father teaching her to shoot bottles off a fence, a lifetime ago. Yes, good. He unlocked a small clasp on the saddlebag and pulled out a box of cartridges. You got 6 shots. Don't waste them. Shoot at anything that moves. That ain't me. He tossed her the gun. It was heavy, terrifyingly solid in her hand. Then, to her utter shock, he pulled a knife from his boot and sawed through the rope that bound her to him. You run. You'll be dead before you take 10 steps, he said, not looking at her. You fight. You might see noon. Your choice. He didn't wait for an answer. He burst from behind the greasewood, rolling to the cover of a larger boulder, firing his rifle with a speed and accuracy that was breathtaking. Cover the left, he yelled. Alara's body was frozen. Her mind was screaming. This is it. This is where I die. But then one of Hawker's men, a burly figure in a long coat, broke from cover and ran straight toward her, whooping, thinking she was an easy target. All the fear, all the rage from the last week at Jonathan, at the town that condemned her, at Silas, at this entire godforsaken world crystallized into a single point of white-hot clarity. She raised the heavy revolver with both hands, just as her father had taught her. She lined up the sights on the man's chest. She pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder, and the noise was deafening. The man stopped, looked down at his chest in surprise, and then crumpled to the dirt. She had done it. She had killed a man, and she was still alive. A new wild energy surged through her. She scrambled behind a rock, her heart hammering a hole in her chest. She saw another muzzle flash from the ridge. She aimed and fired again. A yell, and the shooting from that direction stopped. The fight was fast, brutal, and choked with the smell of gunpowder and hot blood. Silas moved like a demon, a blur of deadly motion. In 2 minutes, it was over. 3 of Hawker's men were down. The rest had vanished back over the ridge, their dead companions and their pride left behind in the dust. Silence, thick and heavy, returned. Alara was shaking so hard she dropped the revolver. Her hands were numb. She had just taken 2 lives. She felt nothing. She felt everything. Not bad, Silas grunted. He was leaning heavily against his rock, his left arm clamped tight to his side. Blood, dark and thick, was seeping between his fingers. You're hit, she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Flesh wound, he bit out, but his face was pale, his jaw set in pain. He tried to push himself upright, and his leg buckled. He slid down the rock, his rifle clattering beside him. He was vulnerable. The shadow, the man who was the end of the line, was bleeding in the dirt, and she was free. She was free. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the edges of the distant mountains in a fragile, watery gold. The new day, so desperately hoped for, had arrived, and with it, a choice. Alara stood, the blanket pulled at her feet. The heavy revolver was in the dust nearby. Silas Vane was slumped against the boulder, his good hand still gripping the pistol in his lap, but his head was bowed, his breathing shallow and ragged. His rifle lay just out of his reach. The Appaloosa, spooked by the gunfire, had bolted and was a dark speck a mile away. Trotting nervously back towards the ridge, She was alone with her captor, and he was dying. She could walk away, right now. She could take his canteen, his rifle, and what was left of his supplies, and just walk, head west, toward the California she had dreamed of. He couldn't stop her. He was the one who had cut the rope. He had given her the gun. He had, in a strange, brutal way, given her back her life. And now, she could take his, or she could just leave it to the desert. It would be justice. He was a bounty hunter, a man who profited from the misery of others. He would have watched her die of thirst. She took a step, her bare foot hesitant on the cold ground. "Go on," he rasped, without looking up. "Get it over with." "What?" "The gun, my rifle. Take it. Finish it." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that sent a fresh wave of blood from his side. "It's what I'd do." Alara looked at the man who had hunted her. She looked at the bodies of the men she had just killed. She thought of Jonathan and the wasteland wanderer's cheerful, doomed voice. So much death. The desert seemed to feast on it. She walked over and picked up Silas's rifle. It was heavy, still warm. He tensed, his eyes squeezing shut, preparing for the shot. She walked past him. She scanned the horizon. Her eyes narrowed, just as she had seen him do. The remaining outlaws were gone. It was just her, him, and the dead. She turned and walked back, laying the rifle down beside him, within his reach. "You're a fool," he breathed, his eyes opening, wide with a confusion that was almost more painful than his wound. "No," Alara said. She knelt beside him, ripping a long, clean strip from the hem of her torn shift. "I'm just not you." She holstered the revolver she'd dropped, tucking it securely into her waistband. She took his knife, the one that had cut her free, and sliced open his shirt. The wound was ugly, a deep gash along his ribs. It was bad, but maybe not fatal. Not if it was packed. "Give me your canteen," she ordered. He stared at her. Then, with a pained grunt, unhooked it from his belt and handed it to her. She flushed the wound, the water and blood mixing in the dust. He hissed in pain but didn't fight her. She packed the wound tightly with the cleanest cloth she had, then tore another strip and bound it around his torso, pulling it painfully tight. He was weak, his head lolling, but his eyes never left her. When she was done, she sat back on her heels. The sun was fully up now, and the day was already promising to be a scorcher. She sat there, in the dirt, just as she had been when he'd found her. She was still in a torn dress, still surrounded by a desolate wasteland, but everything had changed. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, mirroring the exact pose from the night before, but it was no longer the posture of a victim. It was the pose of someone absorbing the shock, the weight of a decision, the weight of survival. Silas Vane watched her, his face pale and unreadable. The man in the background, the captor, was now the captive of her mercy. The woman in the foreground, the victim, was now the arbiter of his fate. The sun rose behind him, casting his weakened silhouette against the bright morning. But the light, clear and sharp, was on her. "The horse, ... he muttered. "It'll come back. It always does." Alara nodded, not looking at him. She looked at her hands, stained with his blood and her own. "I know." She would wait for the horse. She would get him on it. She would take him to the town. Not for Judge Thorne, not for the bounty, but because she was going to walk into that town. She was going to tell her story, and she was going to be the one holding the rifle. The desert hadn't claimed her, and it wouldn't claim him, not today. She clutched the small, hard shape of the data player through her dress. She would find a way to upload the Wasteland Wanderer's story, too. She would make sure he was remembered. She would make sure they all were.